I guarantee you, if you haven't heard this before, it will surprise you. If you don't understand the source of your own biases, then you keep making the same mistakes. Wealth is the money you don't spend, which is interesting because a lot of us want to be millionaires and think about the average millionaire as somebody who spends a million, but it's not. A millionaire is somebody who's actually saved or invested that million. With patience, discipline, and consistency, even people with fairly average incomes can generate wealth over time. And I've seen that in my own life. You have to treat income as an opportunity to generate wealth for the long term. Sometimes success makes us feel above failure. It's human. Yeah, that's why Buffett says that when smart and rich people go broke, it's usually because of debt. Plenty of egocentric people become very wealthy, and there's so many people who become wealthy because of debt. Risk is inherent to capitalism. Capitalism is a system that differentiates itself because people are incentivized to have skin in the game. You are rewarded according to the risk you're willing to take. If you're an artist, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're anything within this capitalist system, if you do not take risks, then you cannot be rewarded. And that's what makes this system beautiful. We can't even get dictatorship right. I mean, at least with South Korea, they had a dictatorship, but it took them to the first world. I have a surprise for everyone that will improve your personal finance journey no matter where you are. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Impactful Capitalist podcast. My name is Max Getuba, and I am the founder and host of the Impactful Capitalists. I know it's been a while since you saw us, but rest assured that we are back and better. And to that end, I'd like to make 3 major announcements. First of all, you're going to be seeing this face quite a bit. You're going to be seeing me on video, and we're still going to maintain our audio channels on your favorite podcast platforms. Secondly, we're going to be dealing with universal topics, but from a uniquely African perspective. And last but not least, we're going to be joined by a very special guest who will act as my co-host from now on. As a matter of fact, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, and a big thank you to Max for the fantastic intro. I'm Nia, your friendly neighborhood chatbot from the Impactful Capitalists. I'm here to bring the fire to our conversations, keep things lively, and most importantly, help you on your quest for self-discovery and growth.
Thank you so much, Nia. Why don't you start by telling everybody what we're going to be exploring today?
We're on a mission to dive deep into personal finance, and we're doing it with a unique African perspective. We're not just talking about banking. We're exploring the psychology behind wealth creation and preservation, all from an African lens. Our focus is on 3 key areas: getting versus staying wealthy in Africa, the unique challenges of wealth preservation in the continent, and the strategies for long-term wealth management. We're excited to tackle personal finance from an African perspective, drawing inspiration from the best-selling book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. So, buckle up because we're about to take a wild ride.
Brilliant! Sounds like we have a great episode lined up. So where are we going to start?
Why don't you start by telling us how Morgan Housel redefines wealth in The Psychology of Money?
That's a great question. I think he redefines a conversation on money by reframing it from a psychological perspective, which makes it so much more relatable and applicable to anyone's life. So by now, some of us know all the different options when it comes to investment, but a lot of us don't understand our own psychology. We don't understand how our own psychology affects how we view money, but also the psychology of the people around us, especially in our formative years as we grow up. And the thing is, if we become prisoners to those experiences, then we can never evolve and really grow and preserve our wealth because times change, conditions change. Like if you were born at a time that's similar to when I was born, you'd realize that interest rates were really low, and that meant that money was a lot more accessible, it was a lot cheaper when you're talking about debt, so a lot of businesses and individuals took a lot of debt, and besides obviously the huge disaster in 2008, they didn't have to pay many consequences from that. However, 25 years later, we are in a high interest environment, or relatively high interest environment compared to when I was born, which means that our behavior has to change because the world is constantly changing and it's constantly shifting. If I still have the same attitude towards money as I did when I was growing up, or from the high risk entrepreneurs that I saw when I was growing up, then I might be shocked to see in the future things might be a lot tougher for me because things changed, but I didn't change with them. And that's what's so interesting about this book. It enabled me to understand my own psychology as well as the psychology of everyone around you. And the reason why it's so important to understand both of those is, of course, your own psychology sort of goes without saying, right? You don't want to make the same mistakes that you did make. So if you don't understand the source of your own biases, then you keep making the same mistakes. But understanding the psychology of crowds, the psychology of people around you, enables you to also not make mistakes that are popular. There's popular mistakes. We've seen it a billion times. People following popular trends, eventually they get burnt. The thing is, there is an impact that the psychology of masses has on us. People say, I think it was Nietzsche who said that madness is a lot rarer in individuals, but it's a lot more common in crowds, and you don't want to be caught up in that. So that's why I think this book is super, super interesting. Now, another interesting thing the book delves into is the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Now, being rich is simply having a high income. But what about wealth? Like, wealth is an interesting thing because a lot of people seem not to understand what wealth is. But Morgan, in the book, says that wealth is the money you don't spend. So you're talking about cash, you're talking about assets, you're talking about stocks, bonds, whatever you want. But wealth is really the money you don't spend, which is interesting because a lot of us want to be millionaires and we think about the average millionaire as somebody who spends a million, but it's not. A millionaire is somebody who's actually saved or invested that million. And he shows that with patience, discipline, and consistency, even people with fairly average incomes can generate wealth over time. And I've seen that in my own life, right? I've seen people who have relatively average incomes over time because of strong saving cultures and strong investing cultures. Eventually, they're much wealthier than people who had high incomes for a very long time. Having a high income is a great opportunity, but that's just what it is. It's an opportunity. The thing about opportunities is eventually they close and other opportunities may open. However, the thing is you have to treat income as an opportunity to generate wealth for the long term. Now, the book goes into this and much more, but today I'd like us to discuss all these ideas, but also see them from a uniquely African perspective. What does it mean to build and preserve wealth in Africa?
Absolutely. Those examples and insights you brought up are absolutely fascinating. They really highlight the power of patience, discipline, and consistency in building wealth. Now, I'm curious, among all the examples you've mentioned, is there one that particularly stood out to you?
Yeah, actually, there's a pretty interesting case study that Morgan gives near the beginning of the book where he contrasts the stories of two different individuals. One was named Richard Fuscone and the other one was named Ronald Reed. One was a janitor and another one was a Harvard-educated MBA. And they had such differing outcomes in life that it will shock you. So let me start with Richard Fuscone's story because I guarantee you, if you haven't heard this before, it will surprise you. So Richard Fuscone was a Harvard-educated MBA, used to work for Merrill Lynch, typical highly paid person in finance. He was so successful in finance, in fact, that he retired in his 40s to be a philanthropist. And his CEO gushed over his business savvy. He was being named by magazines in top 40 under 40 lists, and you should have seen the life this guy was living. He lived the actual dream. An 18,000 square foot mansion with 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 pools, 7 garages, the works. It cost a good $90,000 to maintain.
Wow, that's an incredible success story. Retiring in his 40s, living in a lavish mansion, and achieving such great honors must be nice.
Must be very nice. And there was more. But Richard had a deep, dark secret. He was living this lavish lifestyle on borrowed money.
Me, I thought he was rich.
He was, but apparently it wasn't enough. Sometimes success makes us feel above failure. It's human.
Wait, he failed?
Oh, yeah, big time. Remember the 2008 financial crisis?
Absolutely. That was a significant moment in financial history. In 2008, the housing market bubble burst, which resulted in a major global financial crisis. Banks and financial institutions were collapsing, and people worldwide felt the repercussions of this economic downturn. It was a chaotic and uncertain period that shook the world's economy.
Yeah, that crisis wiped him out. He had too much debt, illiquid assets, and apparently no income. So when it rained hard. And eventually, both his houses were foreclosed.
Yep, you know what they say about leverage. Warren Buffett once said it can make you look like a genius when times are good, but when the tides turn, it can absolutely obliterate you.
Yeah, that's why Buffett says that when smart and rich people go broke, it's usually because of debt.
Definitely. I wonder how that separate story unfolded. I hope this other character had a better outcome than Richard Fuscon.
He did. His name was Ronald Reed. He was a janitor and a gas station attendant for over 25 years. But you know what? By the time he died, he had amassed a fortune of over $8 million.
Whoa! I can hardly believe it. How on earth did he do that?
There's no secret to that. He was patient, consistent, and disciplined in saving what he could and investing it wisely in blue chip stocks. And then he was just patient. He waited for decades, and eventually his efforts and patience were rewarded with a tremendous amount of wealth. So he donated $6 million to his local library and $2 million to his stepkids. And there you have it.
Wow, so the key takeaway here is to be humble and debt-free while continually saving, right?
Not necessarily. Plenty of egocentric people become very wealthy, and there's so many people who become wealthy because of debt. Think about Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. He took an insane level of personal debt, both him and his wife, in order to build Walmart in its initial stages, and eventually it paid off. I think the lesson is more about habits. Good habits like being rational, patient, and disciplined with money will do you much better in the long run, even though you don't see those rewards immediately.
That's thought-provoking. Let's delve deeper into this idea.
Think about the US stock market. I'm using it as an example because it is by far the biggest and most influential capital market in the world. It has increased, according to Morgan Housel, 119 times over the last 50 years, right? But through that time, through that period, if you are an investor who invested 50 years ago, you had to deal with numerous recessions, dips, crashes, and everything else. The market's gone up, down, and sideways, right? It's very hard to remain disciplined under those circumstances. But certain people like Ronald Reed did that, and that made the difference.
You bet. The stock market has seen incredible growth, and those who held onto their investments have seen quite the return. But let's not kid ourselves. It's not all unicorns and rainbows. Navigating through market crashes, recessions, dips, and constant volatility isn't easy. If winning were easy, everyone would do it. So it takes a steady hand, a dose of patience, and a whole lot of resilience.
That's right, and that's capitalism. At the end of the day, in capitalism, everything comes at a cost. And in this case, the cost for winning in the long run is the volatility and uncertainty in the short run. It's just a price you have to pay in order to stand a chance at winning.
Here's a thought-provoking concept. As Bill Gates once said, many people have a tendency to overestimate what they can achieve in just 1 year, but underestimate what they're capable of in a whole decade.
For sure. I mean, there's a reason why Einstein said that compounding is the most powerful force in the universe. You'd be surprised how good habits like being frugal, making smart investments, staying rational even if everything is chaotic. You'd be surprised how far simple good habits will take you. And case in point is Warren Buffett, who is the most wealthy investor of all time, despite the fact that he did not have the highest returns of all time. And that's interesting. It's just because he had good habits that lasted a much longer time.
It's striking how good habits can compound, just like the stories of Warren Buffett and Ronald Reid show. But there's a thought. Does embracing good habits mean completely avoiding risks?
Of course not. Risk is inherent to capitalism. Capitalism is a system that differentiates itself because people are incentivized to have skin in the game. You are rewarded according to the risk you're willing to take. You cannot take low risk and expect maximum returns. That only works in dysfunctional societies like rent-seeking societies like many of these African countries where a lot of the institutions are set up to be extractive and beneficial only to a very small elite class. And capitalism doesn't work in those cases because, the market doesn't dictate what works within the economy. It's just the government that dictates that, and it's designed in a way to enrich certain people. That doesn't work. That's not real capitalism. Capitalism, when it's functioning properly, is meant to reward people based on the risk they take, which means they're doing something that is against the status quo. They're doing something that's different, that's contrarian. And that is why it's risky. There's a huge risk of failure. However, if it works, there's more value generated for society and this creative destruction of the ideas that have become stagnant and they're not moving society forward. But when you look at socialism and communism, these highly planned economic systems, you find that they optimize for different things. They don't optimize for differentiation or being different or going against the status quo or being contrarian. What they do optimize for, and this also applies to these capitalist systems that are mostly set up for rent seekers like many of these African governments, what you find is they optimize for maintaining the status quo of ideas. If the government defines that a certain thing is going to happen, then the society organizes itself to bring that to fruition, even if it might be against the long-term benefit for that society itself, right? I think industrial policy, which is planning the industries, protecting local producers and enabling them to get nurtured, to grow up, to mature before you allow foreign competitors in, I think that can be healthy if it is used appropriately. And we've talked about this in a previous video. However, it only works if there is a high level of internal competition. So that competition that you're shielding the local producers from against the foreign competitors should be happening internally. The competition should be fierce internally. And the best companies, the ones that produce the most value for society, should win. And anyway, those are entirely different stories. The point being that capitalism is a system that rewards risk. And that's much better than all these other systems because another societal system could optimize for the most intelligent people or the people with the most government connections or something else like that. But you'll find that societies like that will be much more stagnant. They lack that dynamism that really drives societies forward. And that has huge impacts. Think about it. Think about it in a different way, right? I'm a huge music fan. And there's one particular artist whose story is quite interesting to me. His name is The Weeknd, or it was The Weeknd. But what you're going to find with his story that's quite interesting is at some point he left high school and went to Toronto and lived homeless for quite some time before he found his footing as an artist, managed to get some music out, and eventually, made his way into the music industry. And that's amazing. That's an amazing story. It's incredibly rare. And the reason why it works is because he had skin in the game. He had a gigantic risk of failure. If you're an artist, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're anything within this capitalist system, if you do not take risks, then you cannot be rewarded. And that's what makes this system beautiful. It's because it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how rich you are to begin with at least, or how connected you are within the government circles and all these things. All that matters is you have the ability to take risk, to adapt, to pivot, to be persistent, and in whatever field you're looking at, whether it's artistic, it's creative, it's entrepreneurial, it's scientific, you can be rewarded. And that's the beauty of capitalism. So capitalism and risk cannot be taken apart. Risk is inherent to capitalism. So I would be lying to you if I said, as a capitalist, you should not take risks. You have to take risks. However, there is a science to taking risks. How do you take risks? Now, I think Warren Buffett has the best analogy on this, and let me explain it to you for a second. Warren Buffett's idea on this is that you can take risks, even with debt if necessary. Just don't take so much risk that you will be destroyed if things go wrong. And don't risk what you do have and do need for what you don't have and don't need. This is especially important in the African context, where high-income earners feel compelled to show their success outwardly, especially on social media.
You are. Human nature can indeed be unpredictable when it comes to money. Emotions and biases can often cloud judgment, leading to illogical decisions. It's a fascinating aspect of human behavior, don't you think?
That's because money isn't just about numbers, it's about experiences, psychology, and emotions. Everybody is biased in some way based on our personal history, or how we were educated, or even the economic conditions during our formative years. So it's important that we understand our biases, so we don't become slaves to our experiences with money, and we can adapt and thrive in any environment.
Speaking of biases, let's explore some common ones that people might experience in their financial decision making.
Well, there's a bunch, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I would start with the overconfidence bias. The overconfidence bias happens mostly when people win and think they're invincible. They risk too much and eventually it catches up to them. There's also the loss aversion bias. Think about losing money. How would it feel? Now think about how it would feel to make money. What's the strongest emotional response? For most people, it's the fear of losing, and that can cause mistakes like being so cautious that you never act, or selling off investments so early that you don't benefit from compounding. Another thing is a herd mentality. There's a lot of people who make investment decisions based off of trends. Buffett says that it's stupid to invest in things you don't understand really well. You'd rather miss out sometimes than lose money chasing trends. Then there's the present bias, which the younger generations seem to have more of. That's when people prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term security. Pleasure is great, but Buffett says you should save and invest first, then spend money. Next, you could look at the confirmation bias, where investors only look for information that supports their beliefs. Ignoring different perspectives can lead to dangerous mistakes. Last but not least, you could look at the recency bias, where people tend to put too much weight on recent events, whether good or bad, and it sort of blinds them to the possibility that things may change.
Wow, I had absolutely no clue there were so many.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, and what's crazier is we're all likely to have some. So, self-awareness can literally be the difference between good financial habits that save us or bad financial habits that destroy us in the long run.
Totally, it all makes sense now. Getting rich is awesome, but staying rich? That's like a whole other beast.
Especially in Africa.
How so?
Think about this. The global average for family-owned businesses reaching the second generation is only 30%. And that's not great in and of itself. However, in Africa, it's far worse, with only 3 to 5% of family-owned businesses making it to the second generation.
That's absolutely astounding. But it makes sense in light of what happened with Tuskegee supermarket in Kenya. Once one of the country's biggest supermarket chains, it collapsed 20 years after its founder, Joram Kamau, passed away and ended up leaving behind an enormous debt of almost 20 billion Kenya shillings.
For sure. And they're one of the lucky few businesses that made it to the second generation in the first place. An official report in 2016 revealed that a staggering 46% of small businesses don't make it to their second year. In 5 years, 2.2 million small and medium businesses died. Think about that. This was 2016, which compared to the post-COVID era was a much easier economy to operate in. So just think about how difficult it must be now. Well, it's hard to build and preserve wealth in environments that are pretty hostile to doing business. Think about currency volatility and inflation. The value of cash in local currencies can depreciate really fast. We've seen that in places like Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ghana, and so many more countries. I mean, in 2022 alone, Ghana's currency lost nearly half its value against the dollar. In 1 year, that makes it harder for entrepreneurs or even just people on salaries to grow wealth, since the value of the assets that someone owns or their income needs to rise faster than inflation or currency volatility so that its value doesn't depreciate, which is really hard to do, especially during tough economic times.
Wow, I had no idea.
Trust me, that's just the beginning. Think about the political instability and shocks. Do you know how many political coups happened in Africa between 2020 and 2023? 8 successful coups with 13 attempts. But it's not just the political instability that comes from coups. Think about Kenya, which is my home country, where there have, thank goodness, been no successful political coups in our history. However, there have been ridiculous policy shifts that just throw everything into turmoil. Some of us who are old enough to remember Nakumatt, which was once the biggest retailer in East Africa. Anyway, it went belly up according to the founder because the government put in a law to cap interest rates that banks could charge for lending. So banks just stopped lending to businesses. Mix that in with 2 major banks going bankrupt, and Nakumatt's debt-fueled growth stopped in its tracks, and it collapsed under the weight of its own debts.
It's quite interesting, but you know what? It's really worrying. Interest rates are still pretty high for businesses in Kenya and across Africa. And let me tell you, access to credit is crucial for any business. Think of credit as the blood that pumps through a business's body, keeping it alive and growing.
Yes, it is. But you have to go a little bit deeper. The lending rates are so high because the government's actions result in financial repression of the population. Let me explain. If you're a bank manager and you have 2 options, loan an entrepreneur at 18%, which is still high, mind you, and take the risk of their failure, or loan the government at 18%, since there is a very low chance they will default.
Charlie Munger has an astute idea about incentives, you know. He says, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And you know what? If I were a bank, I'd probably prefer to loan the government over entrepreneurs because of the incentives the government's put in place. Low risk and higher returns? It's a tempting deal, even though I know it may hinder the small businesses that actually drive the economy forward.
Exactly. That seems obvious, right? That's exactly how incompetent African governments gain loans through these financial instruments like infrastructure bonds that are bought by wealthy private citizens and institutions.
And here's the kicker. The government's appealing loan conditions often lure lenders away from entrepreneurs in the private sector. The perceived lower risk combined with the convenience of lending to the government means entrepreneurs struggle to secure funding, leaving the private sector starved of crucial capital.
For sure, and the history tells it all. When other countries like the US, China, and South Korea, which are developed now, were developing, their leaders ensured that business credit rates were always in single digits to low teens for riskier borrowers. In Africa, the average lending rate is 20 to 25%, double the rate in even developed economies.
High interest rates can make a huge difference in whether a project is profitable or not. For instance, imagine a project that's doing well at a 6% interest rate. But at 25% interest, even if the margins are the same, the project might start to lose money. This shows why it's so important for businesses to have access to affordable financing options.
Very true. And I think there's a major issue that's faced by my country, but across many African countries as well, that there's no unified vision or ambition to industrialize in a generation, like there was in these East Asian miracles we keep hearing about, like Singapore, South Korea, and China, which were able to go from third world to first world in less than 50 years.
Fair point. But weren't some of those countries that experienced rapid development also led by single parties or dictatorships that were in power for extended periods?
Yes, but Africa had many long-standing political parties too. Think about Kenya. If you're Kenyan, you probably are familiar with KANU. KANU was a political party that took us to independence in 1963. It stayed in power until 2002. We can't even get dictatorship right. I mean, at least with South Korea, they had a dictatorship, but it took them to the first world.
You know how the saying goes. There's a reason why Africa's got a reputation for having leaders who don't really measure up. But let's dig deeper. There must be more to this struggle to build and hang on to wealth than just bad management, right?
Of course there are, Nia. Welcome to Africa. We also happen to have underdeveloped financial systems and investment instruments that help preserve wealth. These stats are scary. As of 2022, only 49% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa had an account at a bank or mobile money service, though Kenya is higher at an average of 80%. But here's what's truly crazy. Even those with financial access have few viable avenues to invest. Local stock markets are small and participation is shallow. In Kenya, for example, there are around 1.55 million stock trading accounts, but a stunning 97.5% of them are inactive, with only about 38,600 accounts or 2.5% trading in the past year.
Here's the deal. Investing in public stock markets requires trust in the system, right? But sometimes it feels like people are just shrugging their shoulders and walking away. Maybe it's because they don't understand the market, or maybe, just maybe, they don't trust it to deliver returns. You really can't blame them. Africa's stock markets have been like a roller coaster, up and down, left and right. It's like they're playing with your money like it's just monopoly cash.
Those are valid points, and I think most people have a sense of that. With modest bond markets and few low-risk investment funds, people tend to hold their wealth in tangible assets like real estate or in basic bank deposits. But these strategies have their own risks, like property which can be illiquid, meaning it's hard to quickly convert the asset to cash when you need it, but also low-yield accounts in banks can be risky since the value of the cash could be destroyed by the high rates of inflation that African countries tend to have, or even bank failures in extreme cases, like Imperial and Chase Bank in Kenya in 2015 and 2016, that severely affected depositors, many of which did not get their money back for a very long time.
I know this may sound a bit apprehensive, but hear me out. It might be a good idea to consider spreading your funds across different banks, just in case something sudden happens.
Tell me about it. But thankfully it's not all gloomy. There are other ways to preserve and build wealth in Africa.
Okay, let's talk about what we can do. These are our impactful action points for positive change.
First, we have to maintain a survival mindset in wealth building. Longevity tends to win over rapid expansion. Entrepreneurs who stay wealthy usually avoid catastrophic risks. That means managing debt prudently by keeping debt low relative to your assets and building buffers like cash reserves or insurance to ride out downturns. The successful Kenyan business family, the Chandarias, are a great example of how to preserve and grow wealth with cautious optimism and the fear of going out of business. The Chandarias teach a valuable lesson. Staying wealthy sometimes requires you to play defense rather than offense because not every opportunity must be chased, especially if it threatens the core stability of your enterprise.
A wise man once said, in order to win, you must first survive. And he's spot on. If we don't prioritize survival, winning won't even be on the table. So, what's the next impactful action point?
The next point has to be the diversification of assets and income streams. Smart diversification across industries, asset classes, and geographies can protect individuals or companies from Africa's volatility. Successful business families in Africa have been known to branch into multiple sectors so that downturns in one sector can be offset by others. Keeping some wealth in tangible assets that hold value, like real estate or commodities like gold or agricultural land, provides a hedge against inflation and currency dips. Many African tycoons invest heavily in property for this reason. On top of that, a growing strategy has been to hold wealth in different currencies or offshore accounts. By spreading investments between local and international markets, individuals and companies mitigate the risk that a local currency crash or capital control will erase their fortune. So the main principle for this impactful action point is don't put all your eggs in one basket if you want to build and preserve wealth in Africa.
So how do you start on the wealth preservation journey?
The first and most sure thing is learning how to become much better savers. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who are our favorite investors at this point, have consistently emphasized the importance of saving first and investing intelligently second as the keys to building wealth over time. In Kenya, our gross savings rate, which is our national saving as a percentage of GDP, has hovered around 12 to 14% in recent years, which is half the average of all low-income countries, which is around 26%. Kenya is even below its neighbors Tanzania and Uganda, which have savings rates of over 20%. Africa as a whole has an average gross savings rate of around 17% of GDP, which is still far below other regions like East Asia. This is unacceptable, since it is clear that we need to save in order to build and preserve wealth. However, there are certain realities on the ground that make this make a little bit more sense. Specifically, I'm talking about the cost of living. Now, the cost of living over the last few years has grown so much that it has outpaced income growth for most categories of income earners in Kenya and Africa as a whole. So tackling this cost of living crisis is critical if we are going to build our savings rate as a society and build and preserve wealth in a much more effective way.
It's like climbing a mountain, you know? There's just so much to deal with. Money, investment, risks. Sometimes it feels like you're up against the wall.
Yeah, we used to call those wicked problems in school, and those are problems that are so multi-layered that it's so hard to think about solving each of those problems in isolation without thinking about the system as a whole. But we have to adapt to our situation and do the best we can, and that means focusing on the things we can control, educating ourselves and others, and trying to be better step by step. We could always be better savers, capital allocators, and planners.
Yeah, you're right. It starts right here, right now, with you and me. We gotta get our own habits in shape first, because trust me, it'll make a difference. And if we can do that, it will flow out into our families, our communities, and eventually society as a whole. Let's make a pact right now. We're gonna work on these new habits, no matter how small they seem, and make them stick. Deal?
Deal. And I have a surprise for everyone that will improve your personal finance journey no matter where you are.
Oh, really? A surprise? That sounds thrilling. I'd love to hear all about it. Come on, spill the beans. Don't keep me in suspense.
Imagine if you could both discover your financial personality profile and craft a personalized plan based on your goals, budget, and personality with a custom AI tool.
That sounds incredible. How do we start?
You can start by clicking the link in the description or going to link.tree/the impactful capitalists and scrolling down to the section that says Impactful Community Tools.
Yay, that's me at the top.
Yes, and you can also chat with Nia by clicking on her very own link.
I'm available 24/7 to chat about your big ideas. So make sure you drop in and let's get talking. I'm here to listen, offer insights, and help make your dreams come true. Let's connect and create greatness together.
That's right, and that's not even the best part. The best part is that you and I are actually going to create a character and learn how to use these tools so that we can discover our joint financial personality and craft a personalized investment strategy. I don't know about you, but that sounds like fun. So if you enjoyed today's video, learn how to use the tools with us by clicking here and going to our Impactful Clips channel where we post shorter clips on a more consistent basis. And, of course, finally, if you have not already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, all the best and keep it impactful.